Hello, welcome to I Hate Rock Music. I am your host, Brian Fox, and this video is going to be about a pretty interesting, unusual band. And I think for a lot of people, they're definitely under the radar, and that's a band called BACHDENKEL. And they chose that name. I actually looked up the meaning, and it turns out they just picked it because it sounded German and it sounded bizarre, and it means absolutely nothing. So, interesting name to choose. But they came out of Birmingham, England in 1968, and they were called the You Know Who, spelled with a single U, the letters N-O, and then Who. So, interesting band name, even for that time, You Know Who. And so they came out in 1968, and there's actually some material that's been issued now of their earlier sound, and they started out as a real pop band with a lot of harmony vocals and not much of the characteristics that they ended up adopting as Bachdenkel. And so they ended up being around from 1968 to 1977, which is really amazing. Um, but their whole history is pretty unusual. So let's get into the band a little bit. Band was Colin Swinburne on lead guitar, vocals, and keys. Peter Kimberly on six-string bass, which was unusual for the time. Terry Hyland was the original vocalist in the You Know Who, so he bowed out, and then Dave Bradley on originally on bass, and he exited too. And then Ron Lee was the original drummer, and then Brian Smith came in as drummer. So the actual band that we're talking about is Colin Swinburne on lead guitar, vocals, and keys, Peter Kimberly on six-string bass, and then Brian Smith on drums, and then sometimes keyboard player Carol Beer. So they became a three-piece. So they were a five-piece as the You Know Who, and then they changed their name to Bachdenkel, and lost two members and became a three-piece. And I guess at one point Apple Records was interested. So it's kind of interesting in a lot of my research finding out about a lot of bands that almost signed to Apple. So makes sense that Apple would have been interested in You Know Who slash Bachdenkel when they were more of a pop band with a lot of harmony vocals. Um, I'm often surprised at Apple's short-sightedness when they started signing bands to their label. You know, they kind of ended up signing stuff that was more akin to the Beatles, and it seems to me they should have been looking for a lot of bands that were a lot different than what they were doing, like turning down Yes, for example, is a odd choice. It seems like Apple would have done well to sign a band like Yes at that point. So anyway, Bachdenkel from Birmingham, England, and then by 1970, 69, 70, they moved to Paris, and they stayed in Paris. And not sure exactly what motivated them to do that. Maybe they found more receptive audiences there, but they ended up staying in Paris. They submitted their demos to both Columbia and Warner Brothers, and both those labels were interested, but nothing ever happened. So when they got to France, they signed to Philips in France, and so they ended up releasing a single, An Appointment with the Master, in 1973, released in France on the Philips label. And then they recorded an album in 1970 called Lemmings, and even that record was delayed by 2 years. So Lemmings came out in 1973, even though it was recorded in 1970. And then they had a second album called Stalingrad, which they recorded in 1975, that wasn't released until 1977. And it's kind of surprising that that Columbia and Warner Brothers didn't sign the band, because they had opening slots with bands like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin. So they definitely had people pulling for them and supporting them, and the quality is definitely there. And so I'm truly amazed, once again, showing the short-sightedness of some of these major labels. The fact that Columbia and Warner Brothers didn't sign them, and it's even surprising that a label like Vertigo didn't snap them up. They would have been right at home in Vertigo and would have been probably a big success. And they're another one of those bands that ended up recording ton of material. Um, they even had a single set to be released in 1969 called "Through the Eyes of a Child." That was a nice ballad with nice vocals, a little more pop oriented, and that didn't get released. And Cherry Red released a 3 CD compilation that has both their albums, and then just a ton of unreleased material. Some of it's demos, some of it's live. A lot of them are finished studio recordings, and it shows a wide variety of stuff. And of course, I'm not going to post a bunch of their outtakes and the like. I'll post a few just because some of them are just so good that they're worth hearing. I'm just going to post the links to the 2 albums, and then probably that first single, and then a couple of other things, including one song by You Know Who. And but let's get to the meat. I'm going to start with the second album. Stalingrad was recorded in 1975, released in 1977. It's a little more low key, definitely some more prog elements to it. Um, a little softer record, but excellent. The band is just excellent, and so Stalingrad is a really solid record. But let's get to Lemmings. Lemmings was projected as a 3-sided LP. I'm not sure why they wouldn't just go ahead and have a 4-sided LP, but I'm sure they were thinking it would be kind of an interesting gimmick in some respects. But Lemmings came out on Philips France in 1973 after being recorded in 1970, and I got to tell you, what a stunning, stunning record. Definitely a first-tier band. The fact that all these labels weren't interested in them, it just boggles my mind. And then the fact that this album Lemmings was recorded in 1970 boggles my mind. Um, it just is stunning. Just a truly great, great band. Colin Swinburne's vocals are really excellent. All the harmonies spread throughout the record are really nice. Um, not always being using the harmonies, but where they are is just really superb. And then of course the rhythm section is killer, and the arrangements are pretty complicated. There's a lot of interesting developments of the materials that goes off in different tangents and different expressions of the basic motifs. A lot of interesting chord progressions, a lot of interesting chords, a lot of interesting odd time signatures and meters, um, uh, a lot of elements that would be considered prog, but definitely very guitar heavy. And there's moments where it's definitely pretty heavy. But there's so much going on this record, I wouldn't even know where to begin if I was to sift through the record and talk about individual songs. I will point out that there's on the Lemmings album, there's one song that's mostly piano with Colin Swinburne singing. That's just gorgeous. A little too short for my taste. It could have lasted twice as long, and just gorgeous. And the fact that he can pull that off really says a lot about the band in general. But all the melodies on the songs, even though they're in the hard prog vein, um, the melodies are really strong. So they're really, really good songs. And obviously, they had a lot of time to gestate before they recorded this album and had a lot of time to work on it. And then the fact that it was recorded 2 years before it was released, they had a lot of time to continue working on it. And there's just great development of the material. Sometimes the guitars get almost orchestral. Love the places where there's multiple guitar overdubs. Very tasty guitar player, very smart guitar player, very economical guitar player. There's not a lot of grandstanding, so you're not going to hear any just outrageous blazing guitar solos, but they're very well constructed, very well thought out, very economical. But there's definitely an energy there, and there's a lot of dynamics on the record, and slow going to fast, and quiet going to loud, and loud going to quiet. And so they kind of qualify as a prog band just because a lot of it is so complex, and there's so many different parts to so many of the pieces on the record. And then there's some shorter tunes that are a little more conventional and a little more stripped down. But Wow. And then some of the live material that's on the Cherry Red box set shows that for the most part they could pull off a lot of this stuff live. And some interesting choices of covers too. They did a medley of um, "Happiness Is a Warm Gun" and "Come Together" that was an interesting choice for a band like this. But as I mentioned, the Cherry Red box set, I mean, two-thirds of it is unreleased material. So they obviously spent a lot of time in the studio. They spent a lot of time writing, and it seems to be all quality work as far as I can tell. I haven't got the box set, but I definitely want to snag a copy and really immerse myself in the world of Bach, BACHDENKEL, um, because Lemmings, um, the fact that it was recorded in 1970 still just, I have to keep reiterating that because it's really a stunning record for 1970. It would be a stunning record for 1973 when it was released, but the idea that this album was recorded in 1970 is just mind blowing. And some of it kind of reminds me of uh, Pink Floyd, kind of during the um, 75, around 74, 75. Kind of some of it kind of reminds me a little bit of Nectar. Um, but it's definitely its own thing, particularly because of the fact that it's prog, and there's keyboards in there in a lot of places, but it's definitely dominated by guitars. But uh, just a lot of it is so complex, and the arrangements are so interesting and go off on so many tangents, and the motifs and the time signatures and the weird chord progressions. Um, Definitely a prog band at heart, but for those of you like me who like it hard and heavy, they definitely satisfy that too. And there's moments that are absolutely majestic, and um, I can't recommend them enough. Stalingrad is definitely an excellent album too, but Lemmings is definitely a masterpiece and possibly one of the great rock albums of the 70s. In fact, without a doubt, it's one of the great rock albums of the 70s. And if it had been released in 1970, or if they'd managed to put out more than two albums in 10 years of existence, a lot more people would know who they were. I'm actually kind of surprised that even after putting out Lemmings in 1973, that somebody else didn't pick them up. But I could do a whole video on how fucking stupid record labels ultimately are. They always have been and continue to be so. Some of them accidentally have good moments. I think about the Elektra records in the mid to late 60s and early 70s, and they were pretty smart. One of the smarter labels, and Columbia's generally, and Warner Brothers and Reprise are generally make some pretty smart choices. But as I mentioned in an earlier video about Backjack and now this band Bachdenkel, when you look at the bands they sign and then you look at these bands they didn't sign, it just is stunning. Uh, Such short-sightedness. But anyway, I digress. So I'll put the links below. Check them out. I suspect that there's going to be people out there that haven't heard them, and I suspect there's going to be people out there that are going to hear this and they're going to feel the same way I do. That it's just mind blowing, and it's definitely one of those records, both these albums, where you really need to sit down and listen to them from start to finish and enter their universe and prepare to be dazzled, stunned, and awed. That's right, I said it. So, Bach Dankel, I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching. I Hate Rock Music.